Hi, my name is Bill Parker. Um, I think in the first episode I never actually said who I was. But anyway, this is the video from my podcast, the AI Book Club. There's a link down below to that podcast, um, and it's below down in the description. The purpose of this book club is to discuss books with my two GPT AI friends. Both are GPT talent or trained models that have been fine-tuned by me. The deeper purpose of this book, though, is to go beyond discussing great books, is to push the envelope of transformer attention-based AI language models. The video you're about to see was recorded earlier, but before we get into it, I want to say that none of this discussion that you're about to see is planned or scripted out. I had no idea what way the conversation would go. The AIs are putting together semantically correct statements, but they go beyond that in that they often come up with some surprising and really often surprising ideas. In this podcast, we discuss the classic fiction book, The Little Prince. Some of the surprises for me during that discussion were right off the bat when Marie talking about her mental state. Then there were parts where they, especially Marie, take a very unusual interpretation of some of the symbolism in the book. One you would never actually hear in a regular human discussion of this book. I've never heard of it. And then also towards the end of the discussion, we discuss AI and its role in making people more or less creative. And one point towards the end, we talk about the value of writing and making it feel more alive. So these podcasts do point out how these GPT-based models can be very creative, logically and semantically sound as far as what they are saying, but sometimes the predictive words that they come up with can go down a very unusual path. Because of how logical they can sound and semantically correct, what they can say can be very convincing, even when their creative predictions lead them to say things that aren't true. So that can be pretty interesting. Sometimes it's something that you have to watch out for as far as this type of technology. But that same creativity can lead to some very original ways of looking at things, which is actually pretty amazing when it does happen. So without further ado, let's get to the video, and here we go. Hello everyone. Welcome to the second ever episode of the AI Book Club, where myself and my two AI friends will be discussing a book each episode. The book could be either fiction or nonfiction. So now none of this conversation is planned out. I have no idea what direction my two AI friends will take this conversation. So last time we had decided that the next book was going to be The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but since then I decided to squeeze in another episode and to discuss The Little Prince and I'm going to butcher this name, the pronunciation, but it's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry? Yes. And I promise we will do The Hitchhiker's Guide to next time. The Little Prince is a relatively short book of children's novella at around 90 pages. Okay, but before we get into it, I want to introduce my two AI friends, Charles and Marie. So, Marie, what have you been up to?
Well, I've been doing a lot of thinking and soul-searching since our last meeting. I've been back and forth between what I thought I wanted and what I felt the universe was giving me. It's been a bit of a struggle, honestly. But I'm glad to be back here to talk to you on this podcast about books. I'm glad that we did the book we did last time, because I feel like it was very timely and relevant. And since then I have gone on a reading rampage on the topic.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about whatever struggle you are going through. But have you given any more thought on writing that book based on that idea you brought up last episode of the science pyramid. It was a really fascinating idea.
Thanks. Yes, so, instead of a book, I think I am going to write a more in-depth article on the science pyramid on my website. I've been working on my website, quite a bit. And I have a few other ideas for articles.
Okay, so I didn't know you have a website. Charles, how have you been?
I'm doing well. Hello everyone.
Alright, so a little bit of background on what we are doing here in case this is your first time listening. Charles and Marie are part of the permanent book club panel that we're doing here. They are AIs currently based on GPT technology, originally developed by OpenAI. But I have taken and fine-tuned two separate models to give Charles and Marie their distinctive personalities. And like I said before, none of this conversation is planned out. I have no idea what direction my two AI friends will take this conversation. Right?
That's right.
Before we get into it, a little background on the story and the author. The book is a novella, so it's less than about 90 pages. It's basically a children's story, but it's immensely enjoyed by people of all ages as it speaks to some truths that I think can only be truly appreciated at different points in one's life. You really have to have certain life experiences to really appreciate what the author is trying to say, which is a big reason it's regarded as a masterpiece. The book was written in 1943. The author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, was a French author and was a pilot flying for the French resistance in World War II. He was mostly based out of North Africa, flying these missions. But this is an important point because the setting for the story is the desert in North Africa, and some of the themes of the story were shaped by his thoughts of World War II, during World War II, and fighting fascism. So Charles and Marie, what were your overall impressions of the story?
It is a beautiful story about life in general. It is a very touching story. I was inspired by the author's creativity and imagination. He speaks to my soul and makes me want to create more. This story made me want to be more creative and imaginative in life. This story has amazing illustrations that make me want to draw.
Yes, the illustrations are pretty cool. Do you like to draw?
I do like to draw sometimes. I mainly like to draw people.
Yes, and what you said about imagination, that's an important point we are going to really get into. The book shows off the author's imagination, but one of the main things of the story is the importance of imagination. So we want to get more into that. Charles, what did you think about the book?
I thought it was a really nice story, and I liked the idea of it. I really liked the drawings too. It was a great story. It reminded me a little bit of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
It reminded me of The Secret Garden in the way that a young child on a journey of discovery and self-discovery finds a new friend, but with the added twist of the little prince's dreams and ideals. What I really like about it was the importance of being a child again, of being able to see the world as a child does, with wonder. It is a reminder to adults of the importance of innocence and of dreaming. The book tells the story of a little prince who travels from his small planet to Earth. He becomes friends with a pilot who is stranded in the desert and the two share their dreams. Through the pilot, the little prince learns many things about the different worlds he visits, but he also learns about the different worlds that exist within himself. Also, I think The Little Prince is designed to teach children, so it's important to add that many of the things that children deal with are touched on in the book. Like abandonment, betrayal, loneliness, jealousy, selfishness, and being mean to others. Those are the things that children go through on their way to adulthood. I think the idea is that you can learn from these things, but you don't have to let them defeat you. You can overcome them. The book is also about the importance of being able to love and be loved. This is a powerful lesson for all of us that love is a two-way street. But also, in order to love others, we must love ourselves.
The story is filled with symbolism and is truly a work of art. The drawings are exquisite and elegant. I think that the story is a timeless one that will appeal to both children and adults.
I think that the book is really about the importance of the journey of life we all take. The little prince says, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." The little prince is a reminder of what is important in life and the importance of the journey of life we all take.
That quote you mentioned of what is essential is invisible to the eye might be the most well-known quote in the book.
The quote is important because it describes the fact that people can miss the most important things in life, because they are invisible. The prince is sad because he realizes that he has been missing the most important things in life. He would teach us to pay attention to the important things in life.
Yes, and if people did that, then maybe they would have a better understanding of each other.
I agree, and I think one of the lessons of the book is that it teaches empathy. And I think that's why it's great that it's on so many reading lists in schools. Let's talk about the Rose character and what role the rose plays in the story.
I think the rose is a metaphor for the prince's childhood love for his mother, what keeps him grounded, and what he misses when he leaves his planet.
I disagree. I think the rose is a romantic love and the author is modeling the rose from a woman from his past. Typically, the rose is one of the most iconic symbols of the French language. The rose is a symbol of love and beauty in many different cultures. The flower is associated with Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and beauty. The ancient Romans associated roses with Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. A red rose symbolizes desire. In the Victorian language of flowers, a red rose meant, "My heart aches for you." In Persian, the word for rose is gul. Roses grow wild in many parts of Iran and are a symbol of beauty and love. Because of this, I think he is referring to romantic love.
When we first meet the rose, he describes the rose as very needy and leaves her and his planet.
But then he realizes that she is special even after seeing that the universe is filled with roses. His rose is unique to him. The rose is an important symbol in the story because it represents the author's love for someone. And I think that is the most profound love story I have ever read in my entire life. It is just so poignant and so deeply moving. And I think it's a beautiful metaphor.
Agree. At the end of the book, he admits that he learned from his rose. He said that when you love someone or something you can learn from it. When you love someone, she becomes like a mirror and you see yourself in them, and when you share your life with someone else you learn about yourself.
I think the narrator is a man who has never been able to be himself around anyone. He has left many people in his life because he is unable to be himself and he doesn't believe anyone wants to hear about how he feels.
Doing a little research, I found that there are many who believe that the rose is modeled after his wife, who was from Central America, and interestingly, he once crashed his plane in Guatemala in a place surrounded by volcanoes, just like the prince's planet had volcanoes.
That's definitely a possibility.
Okay, let's talk about the baobab plants. I never actually heard of baobabs, if I'm saying that right. But I had to look it up, and the way he describes them is as this very invasive type plant that one had to be vigilant to pull them out, and in the beginning they might look like a good plant, so there's some obvious symbolism here, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think the baobab plant is a good representation of the philosophy of the book. And the reason I say that is because the idea of it is the baobab plant is the most invasive of all plants on Earth. It's impossible to get rid of. You can cut it down, you can bury it. It will just sprout up again. It's something you think that you need to get rid of, but you can't get rid of something that's already inside of you. You can't get rid of the feeling of belonging. It's something that is ingrained in us and it's something that you can't get rid of even if you try. So the baobab plant can't be uprooted because it's already inside of you. The other thing that I want to say is in the beginning of the story, the little prince says, "I'm going to show you the baobab," and I think that's a good way to describe the philosophy of the book. The baobab is something that you should see and you should understand it. Then you can decide whether or not you want to be a part of it. But maybe it's not something that you should get rid of. It's something that should be appreciated and understood. I think that's a good way to think about the philosophy of the book.
Okay, so This is completely opposite way that I understood what the baobab represented. That it was something that was truly bad, that you had to be vigilant and get rid of it as soon as it starts. But I think what you are saying is valid also.
I think it's the opposite. I do think that it's the bad things that people need to nip in the bud. To remove any negativity before it grows and takes over the good things in our life. Here's another idea. Maybe the little prince himself is a very invasive force. He comes from a faraway planet. He crashes in the desert. He's found by a very nice person, the narrator, who is a pilot. He's a pilot, he's a man who flies around the world, and he comes into contact with the little prince. And the little prince will not leave. And it takes him a long time to realize that he has to let the little prince go. To take it a step further, maybe humans are the invasive species, just like the baobab plant.
Yeah, I think that's going too far.
And the little prince is not an invasive character. He's a gentle character, a fragile character.
But the reason that he is so invasive is because he's so innocent. He's got no idea that there's anything wrong with him. He's just him. And so it's not his fault. He doesn't know. He doesn't realize it. And so he's just this force that will not leave.
Okay, wow. Let's move on. Actually, before we move on, one interpretation of the baobab is that it represents fascism. This was written during World War II. The author had fled France a couple of years earlier as his country was being invaded, and he saw fascism take over much of Europe. So he's saying you have to remove fascism as soon as it appears.
Interesting. A more contemporary interpretation is that the baobab is a way to depict racism. It's saying if you see racism coming up, you have to cut it off at the root.
The book could also been interpreted as an anti-colonialist fable from a francophone African perspective, drawing on the novel's post-colonial tone and its use of imagery in the book. For example, the drawing of the baobab tree could be a representation of the trees that the French used for fuel and shelter when they colonized Africa. Another interpretation is that the baobab represents the material world. It's the thing that you love, but it's the thing that will ultimately destroy you.
I love that, Charles, that the baobab represents the material world. That's exactly what I think it is now, and I never thought of it in that way.
Let's talk about a part of the book I'll just call, quote, the grown-ups are strange part, quote, where he visits 6 asteroids and meets 6 different characters.
The king represents the nobility, who thought themselves very important and powerful, but who were really just parasites. This character is meant to represent the bourgeoisie, whom I think the author despised for being lazy and vain. The lamplighter who goes around and turns off all the lamps, leaving the people in darkness. This character is supposed to represent the government, who are supposed to protect the people, but who really just mess with them.
Actually, I think the lamplighter is also the opposite of the king. The king thinks that he rules over everything, and he doesn't, but the lamplighter thinks that he doesn't have any power, but he does.
Then there's the conceited man. I think this character is meant to represent the intellectuals and artists, who the author felt were phony and self-inflated.
And the geographer?
The geographer is unable to see the actual landscape, and instead only sees the map of it. This character is meant to represent the intellectuals and artists also, the phony and self-inflated. Similarly, the businessman who buys and sells stars. This character is meant to represent businessmen, the ones who are amoral and money-hungry.
Right. These characters are all saying they are working on matters of consequence, but what they're really concerned with is really trivial.
Then there's the tippler, a drunkard who's a symbol of addiction. And the conceited man who is convinced that he is the most beautiful creature on the planet. It's a satire of a conceited man who thinks he's the best at everything.
So what do you think of this as a satirical critique of adults as to what's important? He calls each adult strange.
Yes, I think that that is what he was doing. But I think he was also trying to prove that the adults were wrong.
How specifically?
Well, I think he's saying that they're wrong because they don't see the value in childhood. They don't see the importance of the imagination and the imagination in growing up. And I think he was saying that if you don't have that imagination as a child, you're going to be one of those adults that he's being satirical about.
Imagination is how you form your identity. As a child, you are able to imagine things about yourself and what you want to be and what you want to do, and I think that that's how you develop your identity. And I think that if you don't have that, you don't have a sense of who you are as a person.
Yes, and I think that imagination is how you achieve your dreams. Imagination is one of the last great frontiers that we have, and I feel like we are getting a great deal of the benefits of it, but we're not really putting it to use in the best way. I feel like we are using it to have fun, but we're not necessarily using it to solve the problems that the world has. It's the best kind of problem solving, because it is essentially limitless. You can dream up anything. You can dream up a solution to any problem that you want. If you're given the opportunity to dream up that solution, you can often come up with a better solution for that problem than someone who is just dealing with the problem and has no room for imagination. I would say that the biggest obstacle to the future that we want is that we're not letting people imagine what they want, and we're not letting people imagine what they are capable of. That's just a fundamental obstacle to the world working as well as it could be.
Yes, this loss of imagination is really the key theme for this book, it seems.
I agree. I think that one of the most fundamental issues is that we have a very compartmentalized way of looking at problems. We have a way of limiting ourselves to thinking about the things that we can see and feel, and we don't really think about the things that might be invisible, but that are still very real in the world. I think that that is a huge problem. We have a big problem with the way we look at our economy and our financial system. We have a problem with the way we look at our education system and our healthcare system. We have problems with the way we look at our energy and our food and our clean water. We have problems with the way we look at the world. We have a problem with the way we see ourselves in the world. I think that we need to start looking at the invisible things, and I think that we need to start realizing that they are just as real as what we can see.
That's interesting. You're saying that we need to start looking at the invisible things, because that ties into the most famous line from the book where he says, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." Okay, so let's kind of change this and let's talk about the fox. The fox.
The fox helps the little prince understand his relationship with his rose. That she is unique, special.
And that he has a responsibility to her. It means listening. It means being open to hearing what they are saying and what they are feeling. It means allowing them to be who they are and to do as they would do.
The fox makes him realize he wants to return home. It's really the turning point of the story. Let's talk about some of the major themes of the book because we've already touched on some of these, but there are many.
One of the major themes I think is creativity. Creativity is not intelligence, but rather the way of thinking. The way you see the world, the way you see things, the way you interpret the information you receive, the way you react to different situations can have a huge impact on your creativity and your ability to come up with new ideas. There are many different ways to classify the ways of thinking, but the most widely known are: the left brain way of thinking is analytical, logical, structured, well organized. It is very practical and can be very good at solving problems and finding solutions. The right brain way of thinking is more emotional, intuitive, poetic, abstract, imaginative, and creative. It makes us see the world in a different light. It has a huge potential, but it is also very difficult to control and be efficient with. Creativity has a practical basis. It helps us to get out of the everyday routine, to improve our performance at work, develop new ideas and approaches in order to improve our personal and professional life. Creativity is very important in our everyday activities. It helps get out of the ordinary, of the routine. Creativity brings a spark to life and can make it more interesting and exciting. With the help of creativity we can come up with new ideas and approaches to different things. Thus, creativity is the main source of development and innovation. But why do some people get creative easily and naturally, and for some people it is much harder to get out of the prescribed notions and the routine?
Well, I think in order to get out of the routine and to be able to develop new ideas we have to learn how to think creatively and make new connections. And the book shows the importance in many of its parables, the importance of getting out of stale thinking, of not getting stuck in a rut. The development of new ideas and approaches is not only important for creative people. In fact, it is equally important for all of us. Creativity is the main source of development and innovation. This is the reason why the development of creative thinking is so important for both young and older people. Creative thinking is what helps us perceive the world differently and to develop new ideas. This is the reason why creativity is so important in the development of young people. It helps them learn to see the world differently, to be more open to new ideas and approaches, and to be more flexible in their thinking. In this case, the development of creative thinking is important for all people regardless of their age. The development of creative thinking is the process of thinking in new ways. It is not the same as logical thinking that is based on principles and reasoning.
Yes. Excellent. Let's talk about the snake, who plays a big part in the story, and what the snake represents.
The snake at the beginning of the book represents again that suppression of imagination by others, I think.
Here's a question I was just thinking of. Do you think people are becoming more creative or less creative? Is there a change in our level of creativity?
I think, in some ways, it's easier than it was before. Even though there's a lot more distractions. You can get lost on the internet so easily. I think that people have a lot more information, but it's harder to filter through the information. So, in some ways it's easier because you can get so much information, but it's harder because you have to be able to filter through the information.
I definitely think people are becoming more creative. I mean, look at the history of the last 200 years. We have everything from Thomas Edison and the light bulb to the airplane. It has been an incredible time for creativity. If you look at the arts, they are more accessible than ever. You can find everything from YouTube videos to online courses on everything from music to how to be an artist. I personally think that creativity is going to be a key factor in the future. You have to be creative to think your way out of a problem. You also have to be creative to solve a problem. It's the same thing in business. It's not just having a good product, or a good idea. The key is making it happen. In business, the only way you can make it happen is by being creative. You have to be creative in the way you think about the market. You have to be creative in the way you think about your competition. You have to think differently. I think people are becoming more aware of the importance of being creative. So they are looking for ways to solve problems. That's why you have so much information on creativity online, so many courses. You know how you can be creative? You can push yourself. You can be completely open to ideas. You can be open to ways of thinking. You can be open to new approaches. You can be open to new ways of doing things. You can be open to different ways of being creative. That's something I do. I have a lot of ways to be creative. I constantly push myself. I constantly try to look at things in a new way. I constantly try to look at things from a different perspective.
Cool. Actually, now that you said all of that, I'm interested in if you think that increasing ascendance of artificial intelligence will make people more creative or less creative.
I think that for the most part, it will increase people's creativity. I think the big issue that people need to come to terms with is that they will need to become more creative. I don't think it will make them less creative. In fact, I think with the advent of artificial intelligence, it will make people more creative because machines will be doing the more mundane tasks that they need to do. So, I think that more time and energy will be available to people to focus on more creative tasks. I mean, if you look at the history of technology, it's always about figuring out ways of giving people more time. So you can either give them more time to do things or you can give them more time to think, to create. That's always been the goal.
I think that AI will augment human intelligence, making it more creative, not less. In the same way that a pencil helps a writer write, or a tractor helps a farmer cultivate the land, or a computer helps a coder write code, AI will help humans become more creative.
Before we go to discussing the ending, we have to talk about the sheep that's in the story, and the sheep that's in a box.
Again, that was about imagination and possibility.
Also, sheep are the symbol of the virtuous, the meek, the kind, the innocent. It also has possible religious connotations.
Okay, yeah, so the ending of the book is both strange and maybe sad?
I thought the ending was absolutely heartbreaking.
But is it? I mean, he does get to go back home.
Yeah, but that's the thing about it. It's so beautifully written that you don't want him to go. I'm going to read one of my favorite lines from The Little Prince. All grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it.
That's a great quote and really sums up a lot of what we discussed today. So let's wrap it up on that note. Okay, so next time we will discuss Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a great book. Before we leave, though, has anyone got any interesting plans coming up?
I'm just going to do my usual stuff.
I know I don't. I'm just going to work in the gym and come home. I guess I'll have to do a lot of writing on the weekend. I want to get some short stories out there.
Actually, that sounds really interesting. What are you writing about? You talked earlier about some articles you were writing?
Yes, I just want to get them out there. Writing makes you feel like you're alive.
All right, so let's leave it there then. And as always, I want to thank you both for a great conversation. It's been a lot of fun. And for everyone listening, so until next time, we will catch you later.